the International Fisherman's Trophy, Halifax, 1920. In this first race between American and Canadian fishing schooners, the Esperanto out of Gloucester won over the Delawana out of Lunenburg. Determined to win the trophy back, the Canadians hired a Halifax marine architect, William J. Rue. And in March 1921, a schooner was launched from the Smith and Ruland shipyard in Lunenburg. Her name was the Bluenose. Her skipper was Angus Walters, and together for the next 18 years, they would beat the fastest schooners in Canada and the best American challengers. The Bluenose was more than just a fast boat. She held the record for the largest catch of fish ever landed in Lunenburg. She represented Canada at Chicago's Century of Progress exhibition in 1933 and at King George's Silver Jubilee in 1935. World War II brought submarine battles to the Atlantic, and the diesel engine was replacing sail. In 1942, despite Angus Walters' frantic efforts to raise money, the Bluenose was sold to the West Indies Trading Company to haul freight. In January 1946, shorn of mast and sails, laden with bananas and rum, she struck a reef off the coast of Haiti and sank. "200 years ago, Great Britain sought a northwest passage from Europe to the Orient. On the unexplored west coast of Vancouver Island, the famous navigator Captain James Cook paused in his search to shelter at Nootka Sound. While his ships were being refitted and supplied, Indians from nearby villages offered to trade sea otter pelts for iron, brass, nails, hatchets, shoe buckles, buttons. A year and a half later, some of these sea otter furs were sold for over $100 each to Chinese merchants. Thus began the ruthless and lucrative fur trade, which opened up the Pacific coast of Canada to European expansion and settlement. Unfortunately, the sea otters were hunted to extinction.
It was in the North Country. One night in December, 3 of my boys left the trading post. The first, Mathuin Lajoie, was going to a party. The second, Ben McDougall, was off to do some trading. And the third, Alexis Vermette, was a Métis guide. Well, he just liked to wander in the wild. So there they were, all 3 of them, each on his own. Lajoie hasn't even got halfway to his party when doesn't a whiskey jack land on his parka sleeve. Meanwhile, McDougall changes his plans to track a wolverine. All of a sudden, he hears music in the middle of the wood. He turns left to see what's happening. Vermette was already following the music. It came from the north, where now they see the northern lights. The 3 men find themselves in the same clearing. Lajoie had his breath taken right away. The other 2 jump as if they'd just woken up. It was clear something very strange was happening. The whiskey jack is still there, and Ben's compass is acting strangely. Then they hear a sort of noise floating over their heads. It's the northern lights up above, surrounding the clearing. That frightens the 2 winterers, but not Vermette. He knew what was happening. He lifts his arm and says, "We'll go that way." Well, the 2 others follow. While they were walking like that, following the northern lights, animals begin to come out of the dark corners of the forest. Animals who seem to want to follow them. Ben and Maturin shake with fright. Vermette says not a word. And then, a huge, many-colored bird appears in front of them. The vision speaks, says something in Cree, and disappears. Only Vermette understands. That Métis, he understands everything. The three men keep walking. By this time, the northern lights were directly over their heads. Vermette pushes aside a branch. They had arrived. Before them, a little child with his mother and father. And then they feel a great warmth inside. Vermette kneels and offers his pemmican. McDougal offers the wolverine fur from around his hood. And Maturin, the 1,000-strand ceinture fléchée his mother had made for him. Never tell me that that was a night like any other night.
In 1731, the Hudson's Bay Company began construction of Fort Prince of Wales at the mouth of the Churchill River on Hudson Bay.
25 feet will do, Mr. Ross.
No, Governor, 42.
The meddling governor insisted that the walls be built narrower than called for in the plans.
Fire!
Unfortunately, the governor had neglected to consider the recoil of the cannons, and the walls had to be rebuilt.
42, sir!
Fort Prince of Wales took almost 40 years to complete and saw action only once. In August 1782, French Admiral La Perouse sailed into Hudson Bay, much to the dismay of the fort's governor, Samuel Hearne. With 3 ships and 400 men at his command, La Perouse demanded the surrender of the fort. With only 39 men, Hearne surrendered without firing a single shot. The French left after unsuccessfully trying to destroy the fort.
That was our school. Teacher never asked us to write what we did in our summer holidays. 8 pigs. 5 cows. 10 acres of stones to pick. Potato patch to water. Two horses. Hay to pitch. The thrashing machine came for a week. That was our farm in Manitoba, 40 years ago. That's before I learned to paint pictures of what I did in my summer holidays.
In 1830, Governor George Simpson of the Hudson's Bay Company, Lady Frances Simpson, and their piano set sail from England. Weeks later, they landed in Montreal. The Simpsons soon began packing such necessities as wine, teapots, and sugar basins for what would prove to be a long and arduous journey west to lower Fort Garry. By late summer, after enduring waterfalls and merciless portages, the Simpsons arrived at Lac-la-Pluie. The inhabitants were so overwhelmed by Lady Simpson that the fort was renamed Fort Frances in her honor. Having exchanged their freighter canoes for lighter, more portable river craft, the Simpsons and the Prairie's first piano arrived safely at their destination, Lower Fort Garry, near what is now Winnipeg.
During the last ice age, an inviting bridge of land connected Asia and North America. The floor of the Bering Sea was once a treeless pasture for herds of elk and caribou, and those who fed on them. In a march which must have taken generations, the hunters of Asia wove through the coastal mountains as the ice retreated. With scanty supplies, primitive weapons, and a sustenance of roots and berries. They pursued the elusive herds. The newcomers made their way into the Yukon interior. Chartless and alone, they found the river valleys that would lead them south. It was the emergence of a new world.
If you ask any girl from the parish around what pleases her most from her head to her toes, she'll say, I'm not sure that it's business of yours, but I do like to waltz with a log driver, for he goes burling down and down white water. That's where the log driver learns to step lightly. It's burling down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely. When the drive's nearly over, I like to go down and watch all the lads as they work on the river. I know that come evening they'll be in the town, and we all like to waltz with the log driver, for he goes burling down and down white water. That's where the log driver learns to step lightly. It's burling down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely. Both my parents I've had to give way and dance with the doctors and merchants and lawyers. Their manners are fine, but their feet are of clay, for there's none with the style of my log driver, for he goes burling down and down white water. That's where the log driver learns to step lightly. It's burling down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely. I've had my chances with all sorts of men, but none is so fine as my lad on the river. So when the drive's over, if he asks me again, I think I will marry my log driver, for he goes burling down and down white water. That's where the log driver learns to step lightly. It's burling down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely. Burling down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely.
In 1720 they sailed to CB in search for coal, that outcrop by the sea. They settled the land round Morean Bay. 'Twas here coal mining started, they say. Musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-addy, musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-ay. The immigrants came from far and wide to work in the coal mine side by side. Mates became buddies and brothers to be down in the deeps of old CB. Musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-addy, musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-ay. Musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-addy, musha-doo-doo-wee-ah, sing it fall, doo-wee-ay. When the mine shut down at Morean Bay, they packed up and left to work at Clay's Bay. Many mines did they open in this big town, only no number 26 is still to be found. Coal mining spread to many a town. As far as we know, it will always be around. Cape Breton is rich in coal, you see. It all began with that coal by the sea. Much ado, Louis, singing Paul, Louis, Addie, much ado, Louis, singing Paul, Louis, much ado, Louis, singing Paul, Louis, Addie, much ado, Louis, singing Paul, Louis.
1,000 years ago, if you saw one of these coming, you got out of the way. Longboats full of wolves, they were called, rigged in leather, side-ruddered and at ease in a menacing sea, their oak planks flexed to the twist of the waves. With 30 men, this gorgeous rowboat could cross the Atlantic in 28 days and survive just about anything. This may have had something to do with the crews, who seemed to relish the most distasteful conditions. Leif Erikson here, an archetypal Norseman, was quite prepared to conquer a new world as soon as he found it. In a spruce cove in Newfoundland, this blend of aggression and technology reached America 500 years before Columbus.
News Canada, October 26, 1878. Good evening. At the opening of Parliament today, behind these handsome new gates, the newly elected Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, made an announcement of deep interest to all Canadians.
The Transcontinental Railway should be built, and built at once.
The promise of a transcontinental railway convinced Manitoba and British Columbia to join Confederation. After years of delay and political infighting, Macdonald has now given the green light to the revival of the railway project. We'll have more news right after this.
Introducing the Champion, the only truly perfect washer made. Its cranking action leaves clothes sweet and clean. Use low crank for those delicate unmentionables. High crank for those tough barnyard stains. Compare Champion with other leading washers. Available in attractive cast iron hoop native oak. Put a Champion in your home. Price $6.
In the past 10 years, reports the Department of Immigration, 350,000 immigrants have arrived in Canada, swelling the population to an all-time high of 3.5 million souls. At the Victoria Hotel this afternoon, a showing of the newest fashions gave Canadian ladies sundry glimpses of coming glories.
For afternoon wear, the overskirt was looped up at the sides and richly draped behind. Trimmed up the front with bows of silk. A dress for little girls. The specialty, a black velvet scarf. And here, a ball gown. The flowing train was bordered with a full double plissé flounce. A nosegay added a graceful touch to this stylish opera jacket. Of further interest to ladies, the new skirt lifter, invented by Mrs. Hooper of Calgary. The apparatus can raise a skirt 6 inches to avoid nuisance while crossing a muddy street.
In sports, Dateline Montreal. Canada's own Ned Hanlon was in top form to take on the American Charles Courtney in the North American Sculling Championships. The race got off to a brisk start. Always a joker, Hanlon lived up to his reputation by entertaining spectators with playful jests, only to leap up and continue to race, beating the bewildered Yank by 3 good lengths. This victory leaves no doubt that our Ned is the greatest sculler of all time. And now the weather.
Canadian geese seen flying south early this year. Indicates a long and cold winter on the way.
And that's the news, October 26, 1878. Good night.
The first Acadian settlers picked the wrong place to live. An ice-bound island in the Bay of Fundy, which they promptly denuded for house timber. 79 craftsmen from mild central France had come for furs and had none to wear. They subsisted on snow water and salt meat, lacking medicine, Indian advice, and even firewood. Half the men eventually died of scurvy and exposure. With spring and supplies from France, they scoured the coast for 200 miles south, only to return to the Bay of Fundy, and a very much better sight. Champlain's men built a charming late medieval hotel with fresh water and firewood and all the conveniences of 1605. Called it Port Royal, heart of Acadia. This house is made of sod. The nearest trees are 100 miles away. The plowing begins before dawn to avoid the midday heat. It's easier and faster now that they have a horse. The first year, their only crop was buffalo bones. They had planted the seed too early. And now this year, ice and hail have taken much of the crop. What is left of it has to be flailed and stored before winter comes. Survival depends on it. In the early years, winter was feared, but now there are warm furs and the horse for journeys into town. They are warm and secure in their home and determined that they are going to make it.
To the prairies of the West, by way of strays from the Spanish conquest to the south, came the horse. The Indian was quick to take advantage of this new arrival, and the horse gave him a mobility he had never known. Of freedom on the plains, which was to last less than 150 years, before there appeared another horse. A horse of iron, which was to end a way of life forever.
The drought years. I remember 3 months without a drop of rain. People were giving up. And I'd spent my life building up the place. Poured solid for 2 whole days. We'd be all right.
These could be Cree or Slavey or Salto from the northwestern shield. When furs retreated north and inland, the Indians could no longer reach the trading posts, so the posts moved to the Indians. The man on the right is Angus McGilvray, 6 years out from Aberdeen. He speaks 4 Indian dialects and runs the post. He's a Hudson's Bay factor. This young chief and his band have trapped a year for their furs. 16 beaver pelts will buy them a musket. In Europe, 1 pelt buys 16 muskets. The factor knows the tastes and supposed needs of these people. For 10 pelts, 1 blanket. Our economy for 200 years rested on the shoulders of these Indians, their furs and their exploiters. Perhaps we should remember.
In Indian villages such as New Ianche in northern British Columbia, the ancient tradition of the totem pole still lives. A totem pole is a memorial to the ancestors of a family, and the figures on it are family crests. The poles also record the history of the people and make a proclamation of the rights and territories which have been passed down from generations of long ago. This Nisga'a tribe pole makes a statement of their claim to territory the Nisga's say belongs to them. Territory lost to the white man. They call it the unity pole. They will raise the pole in the traditional way, as a monument to their past, and a declaration that they will inherit the land of their forefathers.
Nain, Easter Sunday. The community has been summoned to a sunrise service. More than 200 years have passed since the Moravian mission first set foot on the Labrador. It is the world's oldest Protestant church, formed in Bohemia 60 years before the Reformation. The Moravians had been invited here by the British government and given title to land around the community to stop exploitation of native peoples by those fishing off the Labrador. From Nain, they spread along the coast, establishing other settlements. For the most part, they were simple people, storekeepers, blacksmiths, carpenters, who also preached the gospel and translated the scriptures into the Eskimo language. These communities flourished till the turn of the century. Slowly, various departments of government and other agencies assumed most of the responsibilities previously held by the mission. The government soon adopted a policy of centralization, which forced the closing of many of these isolated communities. Most recently, Newtak in 1956 and Hebron in 1959.
To Hopedale, Makovic, and Nain, people from Hebron, people from Newtak, going against the wind, because we had to listen to what was required of us. We have moved here when we didn't want to move from our land. We are also hungry for seal meat, for caribou meat and trout. In the winter, we are always hungry now, when we always had these foods in Hebron. Now we are living like nothing, like a void. Some of us, some of the Inuit, the men, those who are able are okay. We're not hungry for the foreigners' food. We are not always able to get wild food here, ever since the time we were moved from Hebron.
Nain is the most northerly settlement now, but families still travel north as much as 200 miles to camps where they spend the short summer, fishing and hunting. It is the older people especially who wish to return north.
Like most things about canoes, portage is an Indian invention with a French name. From porter, to carry, to avoid rapids, or worse. A Great Lakes canoe carried 3 tons of freight. Goods north for furs south, at 1,600 kilometers a month. 11 meters in length, a birch freight canoe weighed 275 kilograms and rode tenderly on the shoulders of 4 voyageurs. Romantic in legend, the real man staggered under packs which weighed more than he did. Chilled and bitten, ruptured by their loads or drowned by rapids, many a voyageur lies buried on the trail he opened west. But their roots became our roads, and their endurance and pluck, our heritage.